Hey, so when I say the term horror illustrator, what are some of the first names for you that come to mind? Maybe H.R. Geiger, Tim Jacobus, Stephen Gammell? Honestly, all really good options. I tend to think of them a lot too, but the one that always sticks out the most to me is, without a doubt, the manga artist Junji Ito. And I think the main reason for why is that, while those other guys make art that hits purely for how scary it is on its own, Ito has a knack for making his work hit even harder through the scary stories he attaches them to. Like, don't get me wrong, the guy knows how to make a scary picture. You don't need any context to look at his art and go, ew, Jesus, I don't like that. It works really well by itself at just being creepy, but it's also never going to have quite the same chilling effect as when you see it appear in his manga. And that's because Ito isn't just making these images to look scary, he's using them to visualize scary concepts. For example, probably my favorite piece of artwork Ito's ever created comes from the start of his series Uzumaki, which is about a small town and its residents slowly being consumed by the ancient curse of the spiral. Now, what exactly does this spiral curse actually end up doing to them? Well, it comes in a couple forms depending on who it affects and why, but in Chapter 1 specifically, its shape gets the father of the main character's boyfriend absolutely obsessed. He starts collecting spirals, eating spirals, staring at spirals, bathing in spirals, and at least in the beginning it almost seems a bit innocent, but at the same time, you can also tell through the way the boyfriend describes it that there's a slightly sinister feeling to it as well. Like, this is only the start of a problem that's gonna keep getting worse as it goes. Something that ends up being confirmed when, after the mom throws out his vast collection, hoping he'll stop obsessing and go back to work, the dad seemingly snaps, choosing to take things a step further by spinning his eyes around to make spirals with his own body, which, of course, on its own makes for some really terrifying art from Ito that works at being scary by itself, but with all this context in mind, knowing it's the result of a rapidly growing mental obsession, there's a whole nother level of horror to what it implies psychologically. After all, up till now, as far as we've known, this guy's only ever been a regular man with an interest in spirals, so it becoming so intense he starts forcing his body to physically make them? That's an unsettling thought to say the least, and believe it or not, it only finds a way to get more extreme from this moment on. Like, yeah, at first he's just doing it with his eyes, which bare minimum could be theoretically possible without hurting yourself, but then, eventually, he's able to make a spiral out of his tongue, and there's no logical way to rationalize that. It's starting to get more and more obvious this is getting out of hand for what he should physically be able to do without getting hurt. But before you can even take the time to wonder what he'll do next and how, it suddenly cuts to the cast at his funeral cremation, and as the boyfriend recounts finding a barrel in his dad's study while looking to take him to a psychiatric ward, we see the end result of what all those moments were building up to. Yes. What you're looking at right now is the father's entire body contorted into a spiral that crushed his bones and painfully killed him. It's an image that stuck with me for a long time, not just for how visceral the actual drawing is, though hey, that's definitely stuck with me too, but for how well it builds to and encapsulates the full extent of the father's obsession. That he'd be so consumed by his need for the spiral that he'd be willing to literally end his own life to be one with it. Just fuck, dude, that's powerfully dark. It's a resolution to the question of how far can his devotion go that's so undeniably strong, it gives the art a level of depth way beyond anything you can get from just looking at the image alone. And that's what makes Ito's art in general so endlessly iconic and special to me, because technically speaking, it's already masterfully done. You can tell he puts a lot of effort into making his work as striking as he can, and goddammit it works, but the way he gives a deeper meaning to it through the story's themes, building up the tension so high you have to know where it leads even if it's terrifying? That's incredible. It's writing that's so fantastic at giving impact to his art, I couldn't imagine one without the other, and the same is true in reverse with how the art gives extra power to his chilling writing. I mean, all that built-up anticipation, leading you on wondering what the outcome will be until it's finally revealed, wouldn't have nearly as much payoff as it does if the art weren't so beautiful yet so unnerving. It's a situation where both are great by themselves at being frightening, but together, they make for something truly disturbing. They're the perfect unholy combination. In fact, the only thing I can think of that's wrong with Ito's manga at all is, well, it's never gotten the chance to have a really good adaptation. Oh, not to say that attempts haven't been made before, there definitely have. If you look at Ito's Wikipedia page, you can actually find loads of them ranging from films to drama to games to anime. It's just that, how do I put this? Most of them suck. And when I say most, I mean all of them suck, at least from what I've seen. Like, obviously I haven't watched everything, I don't have the time to... Okay, I don't care enough to look for the stuff that's really obscure, but I have seen Tomy, Gyo, the Junji Ito collection, Japanese Tales of the Macabre, all of the main things, so I feel like I'm educated enough to say most of them are garbage. At best they're funny, at worst they're boring, but as far as I can tell, none of them ever come even close to matching Ito's vision. They always feel like cheap imitations, and that's mostly due to the fact that they're all very clearly cheap productions. That's why I said he's never gotten the chance at a good adaptation, because the ones we've gotten so far were never given the budget to do his art justice. I mean, granted, that wouldn't make these adaptations perfect or anything, it's not like their flaws all start and end with how they look, but still, at least for something like the Junji Ito collection, where it's almost nothing but shot-for-shot remakes with no alteration, you can't deny they would have been better with a larger budget. Plus, like I said before, Ito's stories are usually focused on building up to those big moments, the ones that condense the themes and mysteries into a single graphically vivid, horrific image. It's what brings everything together and sticks with you most after the story's done. Those moments have to be done well for the payoff to hit like it rightfully should, and in all the adaptations I've listed so far, they never are, so all it leaves you with is this underwhelming feeling of, wow, that could have been better, and it's infuriating, especially when you consider how much potential there is in adapting Ito's work to animation. Anyone who's ever read one of his manga has thought about how it would look in motion, how it would sound, how it could heighten the tension through music or voice acting or other things you just can't fully communicate in a written page. There's room here to make something that adds to Ito's works more than it detracts. All it would take is enough time, money, patience, and a team with the right ideas to see the project through. It's a big part of what made me so excited when I heard that what else but Uzumaki was getting an adaptation through Adult Swim, because I knew that if they were gonna announce that, they'd have to have found the right team for the job. You see, I didn't bring it up before, seeing as it wasn't relevant, but on top of being Ito's longest connected work at 3 volumes, Uzumaki is also his most successful and recognizable by a wide margin. Like, when people think of Junji Ito as an artist, the first images that come to mind are probably from Uzumaki. Azami's face becoming a vortex that swallows her eye, Shuichi's father being stuffed in a barrel, the snail people, the thorn monster, Jack-in-the-Box. And that's just a few off the top of my head, there's loads more. Hell, even in Ito's massive catalog of great artwork, it's gotta have some of his most consistently creative and beautiful imagery. You can't have Uzumaki without it, and I think that's why it's taken so long to get a proper adaptation. You know, with most of Ito's stories, there's not the same kind of pressure. Like, sure, The Hanging Balloons might be one of the best things he's ever written, but if you aren't a fan of his work already, then what the fuck is The Hanging Balloons? Who gives a shit how you treat that? Nobody cares, but Uzumaki isn't like that. It has prestige, fame. It's pretty much the poster child for Junji Ito as a brand. You can't mess around with that. It has to be a faithful adaptation, and with all we were hearing about the production as it went, it sounded like this anime was gonna be exactly that. The guy directing was Hiroshi Nagahama, a veteran talent so committed to getting the look of the series right, he personally did the storyboards and helped animate a couple scenes. The soundtrack was being handled by Colin Stetson, the same guy who did music for The Menu and Hereditary. These were some big names to have on board from the very beginning, and with each new teaser trailer that got revealed, it felt like the hype for it possibly being good just kept getting bigger and bigger the longer it went. Weirdly, it was even sort of comparable to the way Ito builds to big moments in his stories, with the more we saw of the thing and the more it got delayed, the more the anticipation grew, wondering how it would be on release. And over 5 years after announcement, when the first episode finally did air, it gave us a payoff that was just as satisfying. The presentation and style really made it look like it was the manga's art put into motion. The line art was crisp, the setting was lively, the movements, the effects, the detail, none of it missed a beat. Shit, they were so faithful to Ito's illustrations, they even kept the thing in black and white to match his original artwork. And that score? Fucking perfection. The way its saxophone-based melodies layered sound to create this foreboding echo of frequencies really gave you a feeling that everything around you was spiraling. It added a whole new layer of dread to the thing you just couldn't get from reading the manga. Like, can you believe it? They actually used the medium and its properties to add something new to the source it didn't have before. Okay, that's just how all adaptations should work ideally, but after so many years of that not being the case, it really is something special, and the rest of the fandom seemed to feel the same way at the time of release. Basically, everyone around was calling it the best adaptation of Ito's work that had ever been made. Or, at least they were, for about a week. Anytime after that, though, and a lot of fans would go as far as to say that it was one of the worst. No, seriously, the consensus genuinely changed that drastically after just 7 fucking days. It was a shift in the fandom so abrupt, people were saying how overblown the hate was the literal day that it started. And you want to guess why it was that shift happened? Because after 7 days, the second episode released, and the difference in quality was like night and day. It looked horrible. The effects were cheap, the direction was bland, the detail was gone, the characters looked like PS2 models, the frame rate and consistency were out the window. It was a blatant visual downgrade in every possible way, and fans were beyond pissed. Granted, it still arguably looked better than other adaptations we'd gotten so far, but the contrast from episode 1 was just so big, it made a lot of people feel like it was worse. And hey, I can't say that sentiment isn't justified. I mean, fucking look at it, dude. It's an embarrassing drop in quality. And the worst part about it is that the same thing happened for every other episode that came out afterwards. Seriously, the series stayed at this level of quality for not just 1, but the next 3 episodes up through the ending. It was absolute insanity. Like, how did this even happen? It doesn't make any sense. What could have possibly gone wrong after episode 1 for us to go from this to this? Well, remember how I mentioned that there were delays in production for quality assurance? Turns out that went a little further than just touching things up on a finished show. You see, talking some more about the director here, Hiroshi Nagahama, one of his most recognizable traits when you look at his work is that he loves to experiment with the visuals. His first series, Mushishi, is very clean and surreal, Detroit Metal City is fast-paced insanity, Flowers of Evil is uncomfortable. There isn't a single show he's directed that doesn't look vastly different from the one that came before, and the explanation for why is because whenever he's brought on to direct a new show, he likes to try something new with the presentation to match the vibe of whatever it is he's adapting. Sometimes that means playing with the aspect ratio or frame rate, sometimes it's filming the series in live action and then drawing over it, but whatever the method he goes for at the end of the day, it's always in the interest of giving the work a style that's distinctly its own, and I think that was a big factor in why he was brought on to direct Uzumaki. After all, most attempts at adapting Ito's work so far have felt inauthentic, so it would only make sense that to break the curse, they should hire someone with a vision who'd want to make it stand out. And Nagahama was devoted to doing precisely that. It's not like he was delaying the show's release date time and again from a lack of trying, it's just that to get the effect that he was looking for, which was a mix between natural characters and strong detail, his team essentially had to animate the series twice. First with CG models through motion capture to track the characters' movements, and then again traditionally to polish everything up and make it look like the manga. You can think of it sort of like rotoscoping, except, you know, way more expensive and extremely complicated. But hey man, to Nagahama's credit, it got the exact kind of results that he was hoping for. The whole first episode is done completely in this style, and like I said before, it looks fucking gorgeous. The time and money were totally worth the wait for what we got, but and this is just speculation, so take it with salt, but I totally think it's what happened. While the look of the show was amazing when it was finished, it also probably wasn't coming out fast enough for the producers, who were most likely fed up with the delays caused by a mix of Nagahama's process and, worse than that, his perfectionism. Yeah, when I said this guy was devoted to getting the look right, that was actually sort of a double-edged sword in that, on top of the time it took to find and implement the process itself, Nagahama was also constantly unsatisfied with results and made loads of small changes during production. Like, remember how I mentioned he personally helped animate a couple sequences? That's a prime example of him getting hands-on and making edits since he wanted perfection. You can even compare some of the teasers with the final version and see the entire cityscape here was redone with CGI, while several other details were also changed or added to up the realism and contrast. Nagahama was seriously intent on everything being as precise as he can make it, and so although it's that perfectionism that led to the series looking great, though I'd argue those smaller touches aren't quite as charming as the hand-drawn versions from before, it was also what got the producers so frustrated, since to them, it didn't matter how great the product was, they just wanted it to be out so they could make money, and Nagahama, by their standards, was taking too long to be worth the wait. He wasn't pumping shit out as quick and efficiently as they had hoped. So presumably after he finished episode 1 and was gonna move on to the other 3, that's when they decided to make their move. The producers couldn't wait any longer to have the series done, so they fired Nagahama and his production staff, sent their assets to new studios in China, and had them finish what was left of the work as fast as they could. That would explain why when you look at the credits, Nagahama's only the 2D director for episode 1, and one of 12 for episode 4, but the 3D director for every one of them. It's not hard to believe he had the initial initial drafts of everything done preemptively, so after he got kicked off, that material was probably just thrown to the new staff with no direction or studio guidance. That's how we got moments like this one with the characters as CG models running in place on the beach. Originally, it was probably meant as a placeholder while figuring out the shot composition. This isn't how it was supposed to look, it's just the new staff either didn't know that or didn't have the time to fix it, so all they could do was leave it as is. You wanna know why everything past episode 1 looks so bad? It's most likely literally unfinished. Someone up top probably couldn't let Nagahama cook for as long as he needed, so they threw him off to finish it quick, and this was the result. Judging by his credit in episode 4, I guess they gave him something to do after the switch, but for the most part, the last 3 episodes of Uzumaki are not his vision. And man, I can't even begin to tell you how much of a shame it is. To think, we were so close to getting a perfect take on Uzumaki, only for corporate greed and impatience to ruin everything. But wait, actually, then again, is that even true? Oh, no, not the part about corporate greed, that's obviously a given, but was episode 1 ever really that perfect? I mean, from the start, everyone said it was, and if we're talking about it purely based on what I've brought up so far, that's definitely true, but do you know what I haven't brought up once about this adaptation so far? The writing. I haven't said a thing about how this adapts Ito's storytelling to the screen, and for the most part, when it comes to social media at least, that's the same for pretty much everyone else I hear talking about this show. Whether it was love or hate, scorn or praise, one thing I almost never heard anyone mentioning was the writing since they were so caught up on the animation, and to me, that's honestly a massive oversight, seeing as like I've been saying from the beginning, Ito's work isn't carried by his art alone. Of course, it does matter, that's what got me excited about this show to begin with, and I was incredibly let down seeing it fall off, but we also have to keep in mind that at the end of the day, it's still a story. So having great writing and execution are just as necessary for the work to hit, and in Uzumaki's case especially, it might even be more crucial to get right than the art. Like, I already described the first chapter, so you should have a fairly good feel for the writing just based on that alone, but overall, if you look at the manga's themes, suspense, world building, continuity, all of it is distinctly Ito at his best as an author. So in my eyes, the way the show handles his writing should be just as much a point of scrutiny as his art. And from that perspective, to me, even in episode 1, this is one of the wonkiest, most horribly paced, poorly timed, painfully bad versions of Ito's works that I've ever seen. Legit, it's almost like they looked at how most adaptations fuck up the balance between art and writing by, at best, not changing the story while looking cheap, and decided the problem wasn't the lack of balance, it was which way the scale was tilted. That's how bad it is. And look, to be clear here, full transparency, I do not like saying that. I really don't. And that's because unlike a lot of things I've hated for being bad adaptations, I can tell the staff of this were fans who wanted to do the manga justice. I've watched their interviews. I've heard them gush about their love for this series. I just got done explaining their struggles in the quest to be as faithful as possible. There's no doubt in my mind they tried their very best to make this as great as possible from within the boundaries they were working with. And, you know, in some areas they really succeeded, but God, if the animation has taught me anything, it's that no matter how passionate the team behind a project is, if the restraints they're under are too tight, it's never gonna reach its full potential. And in the case of this show's writing, that restraint was the runtime. Like, I don't know who decided an adaptation of Uzumaki should be 4 episodes long, but whoever did was obviously smoking something, because that's just objectively not enough time for how much content the manga has. I mean, I know from the outside it doesn't sound like much, 19 chapters, 600 pages, that's pretty short, shouldn't be too hard to get through all that, but newsflash guys, 4 25-minute episodes is not the fucking standard for adapting 3 volumes of content. That's insane. You wanna know what the actual standard is based on a sample I took of 50 popular series? 10. Yes, it generally takes 10 full episodes to adapt as much content as Uzumaki has, as in 2.5 times the amount that it got. That's how small a space the staff was working with for this adaptation. Although even then, frankly, that might still not be a good enough metric given just how much content Ito can pack into a 32-page chapter. After all, the guy spent most of his career writing short stories that start and end in that many pages. Condensing shit into as small a space as possible is quite literally his main specialty, and that's something he showcased a lot of in Uzumaki. See, while on one hand, overall, it was Ito's first truly serialized story, having a clear continuity for each chapter chapter that got more linear the longer it went. On the other hand, he also keeps to his signature format by making each chapter up to 14 more or less its own self-contained little narrative. They've all got their own concepts, premises, build-ups, payoffs. Hell, they're so complete you could pretty much present them as their own things, and it's exactly for that reason that giving them room to breathe is so important, since they're totally packed with content to tell everything those pages are gonna allow. Not to mention that just on a basic presentation level, Ito's works also need time to build ambience, tension, suspense, dread. Basically all of what the impact from his horror is based on is a usage of subtle, deliberate pace and timing. So therefore, honestly, while a 10 episode count would work better than 4, I'm still not sure it'd be enough for what some of the stories seriously require. Really, I think the best approach would have been something more like what they did with Japanese Tales of the Macabre, where it adapted 20 stories to 12 episodes and let the most substantial ones get their own. Now that would probably account for all the time Uzumaki needs to be adapted. Too bad we live in a world that only got a third of that. Oh, sorry, what I meant to say was that we did get it all adapted, sorta. It's just that instead of the world where dreams come true and they did maybe 1 to 2 chapters max at a time, like it should have been, we seem to be in the timeline where love is dead, and at best, in episode 1, they limit it to just 3 chapters, ooh, spoiling us, while for the second, it tries for 4, and for the last 2, this show tries to adapt 6 full chapters, each. No hyperbole. It is fucking insanity. No. Actually, hold up. That's not a strong enough word to describe this. It isn't just insane. It shouldn't even be fucking possible. I mean, forget judging it by other Ito adaptation standards. This shouldn't be able to work from any standard. Like, you remember that sample I took to get the average number of episodes you'd need to cover the page count? Yeah, the lowest number I got there was 6. And the series was One Punch Man. Do you understand how ridiculous that is? That fucking One Punch Man, a series known for being close to nothing but fights and funny banter, took more time to adapt than Uzumaki? I can't even begin to describe how fucking telling that is. It's madness. It's lunacy. How could anyone have thought this would work out? It's got bad idea written all over it. In fact, it might actually be the worst idea of all time. You know, lower down there are ideas that just suck. Stuff like doing a cheap Junji Ito anime or making Uzumaki a live action film. Those were bad ideas. But this, making it so on average they have to adapt almost a full volume of content per episode, that's about as bad an idea as you can get. And it's a badness that's only accentuated by all the equally bad workarounds the staff were almost forced to use to try and cope with it. Like ruining the tension by cutting the moments that let it build. You see, one of the ways the staff goes about using the time they have as effectively as possible is by replacing scenes meant for building ambience with other stories that are supposed to happen later on. Like, instead of letting chapter 1 play out as intended, giving us time for shit to linger after a really big scare, we'll just cut to the start of chapter 3 as a replacement and only return when that ambient moment would have ended. It's a strategy that's essentially all about saving loads of time by treating the ambience as though it's disposable, which, you know, from a certain angle, I can understand the reasoning of. After all, the show needs time to fit stuff in, not much happens during these moments, the wait between scares wouldn't be affected if you filled up the space. In a sense, it almost seems like the perfect plan for saving time, but that's only if the ambience doesn't have a purpose to the greater narrative. And in pretty much every Ito story, including Uzumaki, it's sorta obvious that that really isn't true. Remember, Ito's scares are all founded on the principle of escalation. They're supposed to get more intense with each new scare the further along you get in the work. And for each of those scares to hit like they're supposed to, they need to have time between each escalation so you can anticipate the next one coming. In a way, you can even think of it like a roller coaster in that with each subsequent hill, the drops get bigger than the one that came before, but to get to those bigger drops, you need to go up bigger hills, and the bigger those hills are, the more time you have to brace for the drop before it happens. The weight prepares you so it'll hit you harder when you finally fall. That's what ambience and suspense are meant to do in Ito's stories. They're supposed to offer calm between the storms so the build-up and payoff of the next one will hit even harder than if they happened all at once. It's a very well-defined, intentional system
system that gets viewers invested without that many scares by making the build-up beforehand just as intense. Meanwhile, the way it's structured now, it's more like you're on the coaster for a little while, and things are starting to ramp up, letting the drops get bigger and bigger, when all of a sudden, woof, the show throws you onto another ride before you can think and wants you to start caring about it instead. So, okay, you're starting over, but this ride is cool too, so you don't mind. You're going through the motions, and things start ramping up when, woof, just as suddenly as before, you're back on the first coaster right as it's about to go over the really big hill. And hey, it's a cool final drop, so the payoff itself still hits pretty hard, but at the same time, while it was a good enough end that you liked for what it did, you also didn't get the same surprise of escalation as you did before you switched. And that's because you didn't get the chance to build the drop up in your mind before it happened. There was no time for your brain to just rest and get anxious wondering about the next scare, since that time was spent getting distracted by ride number 2. It broke up the flow of the experience to start you over on a new one, so by the time it cut back and you got that big drop you forgot you wanted, it makes for a reaction that's less, whoa, that was intense, and more, oh, okay, that was cool, I guess. Like, take how episode 1 handles the boyfriend's dad story. For the first couple minutes, it's going fine, you're getting the scares at a steady pace, and everything's moving like it should, when woof, right after the tongue scene and the dad getting the package, we cut away to something else, and I hate that. Cause the original instant cut from us seeing the dad getting a package to seeing his picture at a funeral is so masterfully jarring and ripe for theories. It's the perfect way of building tension by getting us to think, okay, the package has something to do with this, and we know he was bending more extremely, so it's gotta be related, but what kind of thing could he use to do something so intense it literally killed him? Ah, fuck! See, it uses what we know to make us ask questions we're then given room to think of, so that by the time we reach the scare, it's like those thoughts it made us have are getting answered all at once. Whereas in the anime, we don't get to ask questions since our brains are preoccupied with story 2, so by the time we cut back, we're not wondering, oh, the package obviously killed him and he spent the last few scenes getting worse, how do these two connect? We're thinking, oh right, this guy, what was his thing again? I was too busy focusing on another fucking story. There's just not the same type of engagement since we never get the chance to think of the implications. It's a format that's inherently shit for conveying Ito's brand of storytelling, and that's not even mentioning how it can break the continuity by swapping things around without, ironically, thinking about the implications. I mean, Nagahama said he made all these changes for the right reasons, implying it was a conscious creative choice that was done to make things better in some unspecific, dumb, ambiguous way, but when you actually look at the way that things are restructured, it's clear they not only weren't done for any reason outside of necessity, but they also weren't done with a lot of thought or care beyond, if we don't do this, it's not gonna fit. We don't have room for quiet ambience or suspense, let's take stories that should happen later and put them in the gaps. Chapter 2 is set in a hospital, which would go against the current setting, let's move it to the part where everyone's in a hospital. Certain stories aren't as crucial to the overarching plot, let's chop them up and put them wherever to focus more on what people care about. It's also blatantly been rearranged for the sake of efficiency, and if you think of these stories like they're disconnected, that works out fine, but the thing about that is, there's actually constant updates happening all across the story from chapter to chapter. When Kirie's hair gets cut in chapter 6, that's how it stays for the rest of the manga. When dead characters' ashes keep going into the pond, people stop burning bodies. And yeah, to give the show some credit, if we're just talking about these little things, they're surprisingly not too bad at keeping up with them despite the changes, but in regards to the bigger details though, that's where things start to get kinda fucky, especially when it comes to what's supposed to be the boyfriend Shuichi's slow descent into paranoia. Like, in the manga, it's pretty simple. His dad dies in chapter 1 and his mom in chapter 2, making him terrified of spirals knowing they were the cause, so now with nothing else to do but either live in fear of the curse or protect Kirie, he slowly gets more and more unhinged trying to save her while turning into a reclusive hermit. It's why for most of the narrative, we never see Shuichi unless Kirie gets him to come along. Because he's literally become so depressed, he needs her as motivation to do almost anything. That's how important this transformation is to the story. It's the reason he's not usually there when the cast or Kirie might need him. Plus, it's also a good explanation for why Kirie survives as long as she does besides plot armor. She's constantly getting bailed out by Shuichi's help and warnings, things he never would have said to her if his life didn't fall apart from the loss of his family. Which, of course, is why the anime had to move his mom's death in chapter 2 to the equivalent of chapter 12 in episode 3. 3/4 of the way through the fucking story. Just, what? What? Samantha, are you crazy? Are you out of your mind?
Hey, and by the way, this is me in editing, so I just fucking realized they actually did miss one of the small things in that they say the bodies stop burning in episode 2, but they then burn Shuichi's mom's body in episode 3 so it can work for chapter 4, so, like, fucking... Just thought I needed to point that out, because it was so fucking dumb. Anyway, back to the video.
Because that just wrecks so many aspects of Shuichi's character, not to mention raises a bunch of questions that weren't there before, like why does his life suddenly revolve around spirals when he isn't left isolated by his family's deaths, making it so he has nothing else to think about or consider? Or better yet, seeing as a story meant for after his parents died now happens concurrently with when they're both still alive, why is he so irrationally scared of spirals from the beginning? In the manga, it's only logical he'd be afraid after going through all he has, but in the anime, shit, he's terrified when he's lost nothing. And okay, look, I know it doesn't seem that important in the grander scheme of things, like, oh, who cares, it's a small inconsistency, who's even gonna notice? But aside from taking carefully crafted elements and making them feel random, this also has the effect of turning Shuichi from a tragic hero trying to stop the spiral from taking his last remaining loved one into a weirdo nutcase who's been obsessively paranoid since long before he had any reason to be. It effectively removes the anguish from his progression by making it so that's just how he was the entire time. And seeing as this is one of the main goddamn characters here, I feel like it should have had more care put into it than Kirie's hair length. But then again, what would Uzumaki know about consistency or length? This is the show that ruined its story's thematic consistency by shortening them till they lost all deeper meaning. Did you like that transition? I was pretty proud of it. See, an interesting thing about how Uzumaki handles the concept of the spiral is that while most of the facts behind how it works are left intentionally unanswered to, you know, add to the horror of facing something you don't truly understand, there are 3 key things we know about it that, in one way or another, are intrinsically related to every time it appears. 1, the spiral is natural and therefore can return things to a more natural state or naturally create things beyond our comprehension. 2, the spiral is usually inexplicable and most of the time completely unstoppable once it gets going, as forces of nature tend to be. And 3, the spiral is mesmerizing enough to draw people into its shape, whether those people in question want to be drawn into it or not. It's these 3 facts that form the base of everything we come to know about the spiral, and I find it super clever because it not only hints at the more grandiose cosmic horror that gets expanded on more in later chapters, but it also demonstrates how the spiral, while unpredictable in what new ways it'll affect people, has at least a somewhat recognizable pattern to who it will affect and why. Meaning that once you get that pattern down, it only adds to the tension by helping you vaguely realize the theme, victim, and their coming fate several pages in advance. Like, when you see a girl who longs for attention to an obsessive degree, you know she'll get it through the spiral in an ironic twist that consumes her, it's just that you don't know what that consumption will be until it happens. So before that, you're already on the edge of your seat wondering what the initial spark is gonna be, and once you see it, you're able to take a whole new meaning from it you wouldn't have known if it were a one-off story. For instance, one of my favorite chapters to do this is chapter 3, The Scar, which starts with us being introduced to a girl named Azami, who, from what we can tell, seems to have the properties of a spiral herself, entrancing any boy that looks at her with her overwhelming beauty. However, unlike other characters who either want attention or become mesmerized with spirals, Azami seems to reject the attention instead of basking in it, turning down every boy that comes her way and being pretty chill all around about the attention she receives. It's a setup I especially love for the reason that you can tell the theme of the chapter will be mesmerization and Azami will play a big part in it, but as opposed to most chapters where the person being affected is easy to tell from the beginning, there's an additional layer of tension since you're not quite sure if Azami is going to be the cause or recipient, seeing as she doesn't seem to have any of the obsessive tendencies we've seen from characters like the dad. In fact, the only thing about her that implies any kind of wanting is a crescent-shaped mark on her forehead she got from trying to impress a boy as a kid, which she actually credits for being what makes it so easy for her to get any boy she wants.
That is, until Kirie introduces her to Shuichi, who, after telling her to leave the town when sensing the spiral's curse is circling around her, something Azami misunderstands as her first ever rejection, she inadvertently becomes madly in love with. And that's when we realize the spiral's significance in this story. It was never about Azami's spiral consuming others, it was about that spiral not working, causing her to spiral instead. And ooh boy, once Shuichi rejects her for a second time, again pleading with her to leave the town before it gets her, that's exactly what happens. She has her family buy a house so she can be close to him, she spends every night banging at his door, she refuses every plea to stop what she's doing and move on. It's like with each passing gesture, the rule the story's drawing from gets more and more unambiguous. That Azami wanting Shuichi to look at her with the same eyes as everyone else is in itself leading to her mentally spiraling. And so to convey those ideas in the way Azami's consumed, what could be better than having her scar, the initially small epitome of her desire, slowly forming into a spiral that grows and grows with her obsession, drawing in and consuming everyone that stares just like she wants from Shuichi, until it literally consumes her entire being. See, this is what I'm talking about when I say the context of the rules gives the horror deeper meaning. It's adding another layer to what makes this transformation scary. Like, by itself, this is the story of a girl whose mental spiral ends up physically taking her, but with the rules, it's the story of a girl who wants to be mesmerizing so badly, the curse decides to help by turning her into the most mesmerizing thing of all, a spiral. I mean, doesn't that give her death a whole new air of tragedy? How it wasn't just a manifestation of her decline, but a backwards way of giving Azami what she wanted? That's fucking terrifying. And you can apply the same logic to pretty much every other story in the manga. There's always a twisted explanation for why the spirals appear, and I really appreciate it for showing there's a method to their madness that you can track. Too bad it got completely removed in the anime. No, actually, hold on, my mistake, that's not right. To say it was removed implies it was an intentional choice, and I'm pretty sure the staff didn't intend to get rid of the rules, seeing as... why would they want to? That doesn't make any sense. It's not like it's a good time saver or anything. All removing the rules does is make the themes less obvious and the stories more shallow. There's literally no benefit to it whatsoever. Shit, if anything, it's a detriment. Meaning unless the staff were just straight up masochists who wanted to make everything worse for no particular reason, I feel like the only thing that could have happened is that in the process of snipping away and adjusting shit to fit the runtime, they just accidentally cut an important element without even knowing it. And I am thoroughly convinced they just didn't know, considering they start fucking around with it from the beginning, but not in the way that you would expect them to if it was conscious. See, aside from the rules literally being explained by characters in-universe, which of course was also cut for the sake of time, there's actually a subtle hint at their significance through the first ever spirals that Kirie interacts with, those being the curled plants on her walk to school, the strong whirlwind that flies past her, and the sight of Shuichi's dad staring vacantly at a snail shell. Now, if the show was just gonna get rid of the rules, you'd expect them to cut all these hints to focus on something else, but at the start of the first episode, same as we see in the manga, the plants in Whirlwind are kept intact. It's only Shuichi's dad that's cut for time. So, where's the logic of giving us the first two hints but not the third? There's no way to justify that type of choice if it wasn't made out of ignorance. And when you look at the stories for how they function thematically, that's exactly what you see. Because every change and cut just makes the overall point less clear than it was before. Like, going back to the scar for a second to show what I mean, it's already been really mangled in the anime thanks to the weird restructuring, but it's made even worse by how the subtext of Azami's descent feels completely meaningless now. You know, in the manga, it's a whole thing. We start out seeing her wanted by guys and being aloof, that persona breaks when Shuichi denies her, she moves her family and won't leave him alone the more he tries to reject her. It's a very gradual process that shows us the spiral growing with time to match her obsession. We understand what the spiral represents and why it shows her. The implications aren't hard to glean, or at least they weren't until one guy on the anime saw it and went, yeah, this is great, wouldn't change a thing, but hey, just spitballing here, what if we, got rid of the parts where we saw her getting really obsessed, just for the sake of time and all? But wait, says another, what about how the escalation of her obsession relates to the size of the spiral on her face? Without it, aren't the implications gonna be super wonky? Oh, don't worry, responds the first. We're still gonna show the spiral getting bigger, we're just gonna put it at some random point where Azami shows up from nowhere and it's inexplicably grown in size. Oh, that definitely solves the problem, replies the second. My questions were totally
easily answered. Except it wasn't. There was no implication the spiral grows with her obsession, so there's no implication it came from her want to be mesmerizing, so there's no implication the spiral picks its victims for any reason beyond why the fuck not. And this isn't a one-time deal either. Almost every other story is missing something essential so it can fit within the runtime. Although admittedly, that's not always due to a gap in the rules, or hell, even the structure of the thing fucking the tension or continuity. Now, sometimes it's just due to them cutting basic information that's needed for parts of the story to not be total gibberish. The bully in chapter 6 treats a snail person badly, so he turns into one as karmic punishment. Not anymore, he doesn't. In the anime, he just turns into one because. Nuff said. The chapter 8 lighthouse burns a spiral into the eyes of people who look at it, making them walk in circles. Wrong. People do it with no explanation now. Chapter 7, Jack in a Box gets to have a proper ending. Who needs that? Let's just tell half the story and give him an inexplicable cameo an episode later. Genius! And you know, I could keep going like this, listing off things in every story that don't really add up from missing information, but it's kind of hard for me to keep up my little sarcastic jabs when I know the staff of this didn't want to leave anything out. They just had to so they could fit everything in with the tight restraints they were under. Now, obviously that doesn't take away from how bad they are, or even the mistakes you can reasonably chalk up to the staff not getting things about the manga, but the truth of the matter is that they never would have made those mistakes or shown that ignorance if they were just allowed to adapt the story in a practical time frame. It's not their fault for the series being like this, and I want to reiterate that, since I know the first instinct with massive failures like these is to blame the names of the people that are plastered on the front. But I can tell they wouldn't have made these decisions if they didn't have to. Hiroshi Nagahama has done great work with adaptations before, and the same can be said for his longtime scriptwriter Aki Itami. The two of them have been working on banger projects together for literal decades now. They're not amateurs, they just have limits. And like I said before, in the case of this, that limit was squeezing at least 12 episodes worth of content down into 4. Like, it doesn't matter who you get to work on that, it's never gonna turn out exactly how you want. There's always gonna be fundamental issues when you try to rush something so intricate, and I think that's maybe the biggest problem I have with this adaptation. It lacks nuance. It feels like someone was told to draw the Mona Lisa in 2 hours with Crayola markers, and yeah, when those are the tools you're giving an artist to work with, it's gonna lead to a massive downgrade regardless of skill. Sure, the basic bits are gonna be fine, the shape and form will look more or less alright, but any of the finer details won't have the time to be added, let alone with the precision needed to do them justice, so in the end, it's just gonna be a sanded down, barely functioning, pale imitation that helps to demonstrate why no matter how good an artist is, they can't build Rome in a single day. And that's what I see when I look at Uzumaki. Not a lack of effort, or lack of passion, or lack of vision, or lack of skill, but a lack of tools to reach the heights they would have shot for if they had the support they really needed. I believe wholeheartedly that this series could have been a masterpiece if the team were given the brushes and paint to see their talent come to life, but unfortunately all they had to work with was a dull Sharpie and a piece of notebook paper, so in the end, they made do. And if there's any tragedy in this video that should really stick, I think that's the one to take away. With that being said, I've been Just Stop, you've been spinning right round like a record, baby, and thanks for watching.